this with you. So I bring them, and I also wrote a book that I published just last year on winter specifically, and like how to live in the wintertime, how to eat, how to get the light frequencies that we're missing. So that's back there, and those are all signed copies if you're interested. And then otherwise, like this is kind of part of the Biohackers Twin Cities meetup. So there are biohackers meetups all over the world. There's some in Dubai, there's some in Tokyo, like everywhere. And so this is part of like a global network where we just give free presentations and we have other people present too. It's not just, Heidi and I that'll be talking today. Hey guys, how's it going? Good to see you. Hey Jody. No worries. Okay. Come on in. So really, we're just giving out information that we know and have learned over decades of all the research and study and self-experimentation that we've done. But we're also looking for other speakers. So if anyone wants to be a speaker or knows of someone, I think, Phil, you're going to talk at one of these. So if anyone knows of a speaker, and what we're trying to give people is like information that helps you live more healthfully, live a better life, optimize your health instead of being average. Like if you look at what's average out there, which we're going to talk about today, like what's average, the standard American diet, taking, so many medications by the time you're age 50 and not really being optimal. So we get all these dietary guidelines and nutritional guidelines on how to be average, but no one really wants to be average. We all want to be as healthy as humanly possible. And that's what we teach at all these events is like, what are all the things that you can do to be optimally healthy and which ones speak to you? Because like for me, jumping in a cold plunge might sound like fun, but for some of you, it might be like, no way. And so there might be another thing that you could do to be optimally healthy. Even though that might be good for some of you, it's not good for everybody. So I'm not drinking a soda or a processed food, although I guess this would count as a processed food. These are ketones. So if you think like, why are you drinking a soda and talking about processed foods? Not drinking a soda, there's no sweetener in it. Just want to make sure we all are on the same page there so I don't seem very hypocritical. So we'll do quick introductions, and then we've got a few things just to talk through to share with you about what we've been learning about ultra processed foods. So I just want to convey between Heidi and I a little bit of that information that is on the cutting edge. Like this is stuff, it's not in the mainstream news yet, and it's at like the forefront of the research, and it's going to be mainstream really soon. And so it's really helpful to know about it. So we're going to give a little bit of that information, give a few resources of books if you want to dive a little deeper, and open it up for discussion. Like, what do you want to contribute? What questions do you have? So we don't just want to like lecture the whole time.
Yeah, I think that's part of like why we have this meetup group is like we want this to be a community thing, right? And this is like a free event, it's free for everybody. It's our first one, so thank you for coming. And I mean, this is our health, right? And so like Thaddeus said, you guys, we don't want it to be just a lecture, like us standing up here. Like this is a discussion. Like, what do you guys think? Like, what do you see? Like what are the questions you have too? So definitely think of some questions, at the end and see. I know Travis posted some questions. They're really good in the Facebook event group. So we'll be posting upcoming events. So we're going to have did you go over that? We're going to have one of these events every month here, and there'll be different topics. So I think next month is cold.
Nope. Next month is light.
It's Lent?
Light.
Oh, I was like, what? Lent? Light. Okay.
So next month, it's all on Facebook. So Facebook events, you'll see it show up for Hudson, but it's also on meetup.com under Biohackers Twin Cities. So if you want to know more, you go there. You can sign up to get notified of when the events are. So at least one every month. When we have Phil come out, we might do 2 that month. So we're going to do light, cold thermogenesis or cold therapy. We're going to do sleep. And we're going to have somebody come and teach, I want to get the topic right, optimum or high performance through self-hypnosis. So he's a trained hypnotist from the Scotland School of Hypnosis. He's a PhD researcher and a mentor and coach to executives. And he does all this through hypnosis. So he's going to come and teach. So finally, we got another speaker. He's going to come and teach about hypnosis. Phil, do you know what you're going to teach about yet? Perfect.
Cool.
So most people don't know you can do, you can stimulate the acupuncture, meridians, and areas of the body, or just get really deep light penetration through an LED, making it act like a laser. And Phil's kind of invented some ways to do that. So I think that's going to be really fun. He's going to share those for free with everybody on how he does that and why, as what Travis will find out soon too. So just FYI, like Dr. Travis owns the space and he's graciously allowed us to be here for all the events. So thank you, Travis. And he's an amazing chiropractor. He also has a lot of biohacking technology here, which is really neat, including like a red light bed that you lay on to get better skin penetration of that red light. So there's lots of cool things that he's doing here. We will get to see some of those things throughout some of the talks too, which is kind of neat.
And we also have Joe and Maggie here. They are in charge of the Hudson Co-op. So we'll have them talk a little bit about our local Hudson Co-op that's coming into manifestation in 2024. So.
In charge just to volunteer.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, yeah, 'cause they're all, yeah.
Oh, because it's all volunteer. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, maybe you can explain what the hell that means. And how do people become part of it and help invest? Okay, cool.
You're my boss.
Sweet. I'm bossy. Ask those people. My mom, too.
So thanks everyone for being here again. I think most people know me, but I'm Thaddeus Owen. So I live here in Hudson. I've been an influencer in the biohacking space for almost 20 years now. And I've done a lot of study, a lot of self-experimentation, held a lot of retreats. And I originally started up this Biohackers Twin Cities meetup in 2016, and we have almost 800 people that are part of this meetup. So there's a huge group of people that are interested in all of this. And the meetings didn't happen for the last like 3 years because I pulled away from social media. We didn't do a lot with 2020 because everything had to be online. So now we're back in person and we're trying to regrow the group. So again, anyone that wants to be a speaker or knows of a speaker that would be good, let us know and we'll get that scheduled in.
All right, and I'm Heidi Syme, and I'm a health and wellness coach, like in this space as well. And I've been living with Thaddeus. He came and moved into my house and biohacked my house. So I've been living with like all the things that he teaches. We live that. So we walk the walk, we talk the talk, and we actually wear our blue light blocking glasses. So I was actually talking to my daughter's friend today, and I was like, these are sleep glasses. And he was like, what? They're sleep glasses. Like most people don't even know what that even means, right? So one of the things Thaddeus has put out to the world is a TED Talk on blue light blocking glasses, which is really cool. You can find that online too. But it's like, why don't we know about these things, right? So what we do is we bring these things that are easy, they're free, mostly free, ways to, just really be healthy in this toxic world that we live in, and like getting out and getting morning light and that grounding, right? These are all things that they don't cost anything. They're connecting back to nature. So the slant that Thaddeus and I come from, which kind of sets us apart from a lot of biohackers in the space, is like we use nature's processes first, right? We don't need to go out and buy a ton of gadgets and do all these things. It's like, what can I do first? That's like connecting to the earth and, putting on some glasses at night because there's a lot of toxic blue light. So just really excited to share this information with all of you, but I think let's continue talking about ultra processed
Yeah, we're going to do it. I just want to share the quote because I love, I'm going to read a little bit from this book, like literally just a page. But there was a quote from the person in charge of sleep and circadian rhythmicity at the National Institute of Health. So NIH, NIH.gov, that's our US government. And they have a whole division that studies sleep, light at night, and health. And in 1999, the head of that department was asked, like, if we know through all the research that's already been published that the NIH has studied that lack of sleep and not going to bed when it gets dark or wearing blue light blocking glasses potentially, if we know that that causes or is correlated with heart disease, diabetes, obesity, cancer, and infertility, why are we not telling the public? Don't they deserve to know? And the head of the NIH said, of course they deserve to know, but no one will ever turn out the lights. So therefore you're not told. So these things exist. It's not like we're talking about things that are not researched and in the literature or well known. It's just not well known to the public, unfortunately. And that's similar to this, what we're now hearing the term called ultra processed foods. So we all know that there's food processing. You have corn in the field and you can cook the corn, and that's like kind of a whole food. And then you can can the corn. So it went through some sort of a process to can it. So now it's a processed food, but it's probably not that bad for you. Then you can take the corn and process it to a corn chip, and now it's an ultra processed food. So it contains ingredients you can't just find in nature. Number one, it's gone through a process that you can't mimic in your home, like an extrusion, high heat, high pressure, and it fundamentally changes the molecule, the proteins, and the fats in the food to render it very different for your body than what nature intended. And the interesting thing is, hey, I didn't thought you're supposed to be somewhere like overseas. Good to see
Sorry,
you.
I'm late.
Come on in.
Hey,
Good to
come
see
on
you.
in. Nice to see you. Come on in. There's a
you.
seat right back there.
Now, the interesting thing of how the universe or this matrix that we live in works is I schedule this talk on ultra processed foods. And so I work a full-time corporate job. And in my corporate job, I have to deal with global product regulations. So I have to like know all the laws that apply to products. So on my inbox every day, I get these notices from all these attorneys, and they will send me a brief of like everything in the world that deals with products. I'll get a brief, even if it's not related. So I get a ton of stuff on cannabis every day because it's like huge in the US right now for law. But I get a ton of stuff on food and I usually ignore it. Well, all of a sudden there's these food things that keep popping up on ultra processed foods. So I'm like, this is kind of my passion. So I'm like, I'm at work, I'm supposed to be looking at furniture laws, but I'm like, let's look at these food laws. There's now some laws in other countries in South America that require warning labels on these foods. There's other laws in Europe and elsewhere that ban some of the foods that we still eat every day. So we, hopefully not all of you here, but we are eating foods every day in this country. In fact, 58% of our diet in the US is ultra processed foods. That's the latest statistic by Harvard, that we consume more than half of our calories from ultra processed foods. Yet in other countries, they're banned or labeled with warnings or taxed more heavily than any other food, but not in the US. So as I put that out, I'm starting to see these things pop up in my inbox. I'm like, oh, this is cool. I can read you about the stuff that I get in my legal inbox. And then I found this book in a little free library right before the talk, and it's called Metabolical, and it's Dr. Robert Lustig, who, if you don't know who he was a pediatric medical doctor, and he worked for the Division of Endocrinology at the University of California for 40 years. So he was in practice and he was a researcher at University of California. He just published this book like a year ago, and I happened to find it right before this talk. And I thought it would be really interesting to read you like the first page. So he talks about ultra processed foods. So he said, it's been a rough day and you're coming home after a long commute and you're starving. You sit down at the kitchen table, turn on the TV, and inadvertently consume a plate of poison. It looks like food, it tastes like food, and maybe it even tastes better than food, but what if something had been done to poison it? And no, that's not an episode of the Game of Thrones. It's what happens to most of us every day, every meal, every snack. In bygone times, kings employed food tasters and cupbearers to sample their food. They talk a little bit about poison food, but today our food supply is safe, right? Your cart at the grocery store is full of vacuum wrapped, refrigerated or frozen, hermetically sealed, spoilage resistant, irradiated, pathogen tested, screened at the border products that meet all USDA and FDA standards. But what if that food had been altered or adulterated in some fashion before it's even been harvested, while it's being cooked, or after it's been packaged in order to kill you, and by design? Not because they want your life, just your wallet. We occasionally hear about E. coli, salmonella, listeria, or even melamine in infant formula, and a recall is announced, and then the matter is forgotten. So our food is totally safe, right? But what if it acts more like a slow poison, like cigarettes? One that won't kill you, but 10,000 consumed over 10 years might. Okay, so then I'm just going to skip a few, and he says, let's take it a step further. What if this poison doesn't just kill you chronically, but sets you up to be susceptible to acute illness, say a viral pandemic, that could kill you even quicker? What if the USDA and FDA are aware of this slow consumable poison that's sold in grocery stores nationwide, and they allow it to be promoted heavily. What if the entire world is exposed to the same toxic and addictive consumable poison and now has started to get sick too? All right, so he's like, it's not a Stephen King novel. It's called Processed Food. That is the poison. So we're talking about pesticide used versus sustainable farming. Pesticides are one aspect of toxicity, but only the tip of the iceberg and about 10% of what ails us. Your cereal box may say that it's all organic, all natural, but it still may be poison. What's important is the alchemy of how the food itself has become poison. Until you understand that, you can't understand what has happened to the food. This book will explain it's not what's in the food. It's not what's in the food that counts, but what's been done to the food that counts. And it's not on the nutrition label, and it's not in the ingredient list. Food processing is not listed on any of those labels, but it's what's been done to the food that affects your liver and your gut and eventually your brain as well, based on how they've processed the food. So that's like the intro to this book. That's only like 1 page, 2 pages, but that's as far as I even got in the book. So it might be really good, but I haven't finished it. All right, so then I just wanted to take a few minutes so we can have a discussion here and talk about what comes across my desk. So this is the Journal of Nutrition, January 2024, just published on PubMed. And this says, our data suggests that the high intake of ultra-processed foods, particularly, and this is what they looked at. Remember, when they do research studies, they don't look at all processed foods. They look at some select group, and then they find within that group what's the worst. So in their group, ham, sausage, instant noodles, ice cream, and carbonated beverages is associated with an increased risk of type 2 diabetes, anxiety, depression, and cancer. That's one study. There's a few more in here. So ultra-processed food, they're giving a definition. Peeling a banana is processing it. Soaking and sprouting a bean, cooking a bean. That's not ultra-processing, and it's not necessarily bad for us. So there's a version of processing that we're talking about, which is more this industrial processing of the food, where there are additives in it that are not natural, but also the way they process it doesn't basically compute. It's not compatible with our body. Next study, November 2023, also just published, association between diet soda drink consumption and metabolic dysfunction and liver disease. So most people should know by now, all the diet sodas that are consumed, they actually cause your body to be hungrier and eat more food because of the sweeteners that are added to those sodas. So things like aspartame is a neurotoxin, and when it gets into the brain, it excites the brain and it causes hunger to be stimulated for a number of reasons. One, we think because it tastes sweet, so the body expects sugar and it starts producing insulin, but there's no sugar coming from the food. So the insulin starts pulling the blood sugar into the cell, and then you get really hungry because you need sugar in your blood now to have energy. So people that drink soft drinks actually tend to have higher body mass than people that don't drink diet soft drinks. Next, developing multiple health conditions, including cancer, linked to ultra-processed foods. This was also 2024. So if we look at, and I like to use breakfast because breakfast in America is usually pretty big. Some people say that Edward Bernays back in like the 20s, quote unquote, invented big breakfasts and that they weren't a thing until in the 20s when this was put into our mindset through programming, through television and media. This is where Bernays was also responsible. This is documented for getting women to smoke cigarettes because women weren't smoking cigarettes back in the 20s. And then Bernays found a way to get them to consume cigarettes by doing this programming in the media. So people say he kind of invented like big breakfasts and that if you go to other countries, they fast or eat smaller breakfasts. I'm not convinced that that's true, but it is something that is thrown out there. But if we look at breakfast, like, okay, typical breakfast consists of, hey, Hannah, coffee. Most people in the US, we don't live in Europe, and so we're not, well, at least in the UK, I deal with the UK a lot, and they're always drinking tea. We drink coffee here, right? Coffee is like the third most heavily pesticided and sprayed crop in the world. So number one, when you make that, most people are making their coffee, especially if you buy it out, with water that's fluoridated, chlorinated, which makes our water safe. But the problem is we have nitrates in the soil and we have leaching from our pipes, and those combine with the chlorine to form chloramines, which are toxic. So between the fluoride, the chlorine, and whatever else is in the water, you soak out the pesticides, you extract the pesticides in the water, the ones that are water extractable from the coffee. And then typically, if you're going to Starbucks, it's put into a cup that's lined with either PFAS. Hopefully around here, you've heard of perfluoroalkyl substances, the forever chemicals. Those are PFAS chemicals. That's what's lined on the inside of the cup so it doesn't leak out. Same with the pizza containers, so the grease doesn't leak out of the pizza container. And so those are fat soluble. And so you put fat in your coffee with some milk, let's say, or cream, and then that absorbs more of the pesticides that go into your body, as well as the fluoride, and then the chlorine, and then the chloramines. And then you're putting in typically pasteurized or damaged milk, because the pasteurization and homogenization change the protein structure and the fat structure of the milk itself. And then typically fake sugars on top of that. So you're making an ultra processed food just by having the coffee. Now, of course, there's a way to have good coffee without doing all those things. But for most people, they're drinking this coffee in these cups lined with bisphenol A or PFAS chemicals, again, that are linked to lots of damage with inside our bodies. We can talk about cereal. Most cereal is not soaked, sprouted, or fermented. So that is how grain processing used to occur in traditional communities. You would soak, sprout, or ferment the grain to make it more digestible. But in this case, we're taking usually high levels of GMO grains, corn, soy, and wheat, and then we are heating them, we're flaking them, and then we're extruding them. So we put them into like an extruder at extremely high temperature and pressure, which you can't usually do at your home, and that changes the materials and basically the raw material of the food, but it's not on the nutrition label. So it turns it to an ultra processed food. Of course, those tend to get coated with sugar, and then we're eating a ton of carbs in the morning, and then we get really hungry within like an hour. Or you eat like a bagel or a muffin, and kind of the same thing. Like muffins are basically cake without the frosting. So lots of sugars, lots of wheat, and lots of additives. And often they're adding emulsifiers and all sorts of other things just to make it last longer and look better on the shelf. And they spray coat it with something else. None of this you would do at home. So again, if you're eating stuff at home that you make yourself, very different story. November 1st, 2023, Colombia rolled out a tax on ultra processed foods, which starts at 10% in 2023. In 2024, it goes to 15% and then 20% tax in 2025 on ultra processed foods in Colombia. I thought that was interesting. That was one of those that came across my desk in the legal landscape. And then, as you know, or maybe you don't know, the US is the first country to have approved the sale of lab-grown meat. So the FDA has approved 2 companies to sell lab-grown chicken in the United States. And so far, we're the only country that has approved that. I think Sweden is on the verge of approving it or has already approved one of those. They are banned in Mexico. Arizona has just put legislation up to ban lab-grown meat for sale in Arizona. I think because they're a big cattle state, but they haven't passed that law.
I think I just saw something that Italy is banning it.
Thank you. Right there. Italy is the only country to have banned it so far. Thanks, Taylor. You're right on top of it. So Italy has banned lab-grown animal meats. They're the only country and the first country to do it. But the US, they're already being sold. And you could be buying it now. So right now it's chicken. So like if you want to know what the label has to read, the FDA is still trying to figure out what they're allowed to say on the label. But right now it says cultured chicken or cultured meat. So if you're like, oh, that sounds like a good thing, you might want to make sure you know what you're buying, because cultured means lab grown. And so they're still working through the language they have to put on the labeling. But they can be selling that now. I've seen like lab grown fish as well, but I'm not sure that I've seen that approved yet in the United States. According to a study in the British Medical Journal, ultra processed foods are the main source of calories eaten in the US, over 58%, which I said earlier, and contribute 90% of the energy that we receive in the United States. That is actually insane. So ultra processed means foods that go through multiple processes like extrusion, molding, milling. And examples are things like soft drinks, chips, chocolate, candy, ice cream, sweetened breakfast cereals, packaged soups, chicken nuggets, hot dogs, and French fries. So a lot of these things, like potato chips too, a lot of those are coated with MSG. Potatoes themselves trigger your brain to produce the insulin, as well as like make you want to eat more based on the way that they're formulated. A recent study in the Journal of Cell Metabolism compared the effects of an ultra-processed diet to the effects of an unprocessed diet on calorie intake and weight gain. So the adults at the medical facility received an ultra-processed diet or an unprocessed diet just for 2 weeks. And what did they find? 83% of their calories came from processed food in that case. And the subjects consuming the ultra-processed consumed 500 more calories per day. They had a marked increase in the intake of carbohydrates and fat, but not protein. They gained 2 pounds during those 2 weeks, where the unprocessed people within 2 weeks lost 2 pounds on average. So they said ultra-processed foods may be an effective strategy for limiting ultra-processed foods, are an effective strategy for treating obesity and limiting weight gain. Another study looked at 100,000 French adults over a 5-year period and found that those who consumed ultra-processed foods had higher risks of cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease, cerebrovascular disease, and more. So, latest research, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, heart attacks and strokes, early death, and severe psychological distress. These are the things in the literature right now that have been studied for people eating more ultra-processed foods. And if you'll notice, more of our grocery stores are switching over to increasing amounts of ultra-processed foods over fresh foods. So you find the fresh foods are getting longer trips to get to our shelves and they don't look as good. They're not as healthy looking in many cases. And then the ultra-processed foods are taking over. And of course, anything that's got an advertisement or marketing is going to be a processed food. And if it has an advertising budget, it's probably not like a natural whole food. And those are the things that people tend to grab because all of us are like super busy and we're stressed and we don't want to add more time to our plate. So we add ultra-processed foods to our plate instead. So that's all I wanted to share on ultra-processed foods. But I do think like some of the things to remember is they have shown that they can manipulate your whole nervous system, like our whole central nervous system, the same way that if you put an electrode on somebody. So I think his name, I can't remember his first name, but his last name was Delgado. He's a professor at Princeton. And he did these experiments where he put electrodes in human and animals' heads, and he changed the way that they acted based on manipulating their nervous system. And this was back in the 50s and 60s. And they found that these ultra-processed foods have the same effect as what Delgado's published research showed. Now, alcohol is something to mention too, because has similar effects to ultra-processed foods in the body. It's a central nervous system depressant, and it can also affect people in similar ways depending on how it's consumed. And just like doesn't mean you can't consume none of these things, but being aware of how they affect us and the fact that 58% of the diet in this country comes from these foods is a little concerning to me. The other additives that you find are things like MSG, aspartame, these artificial sweeteners, and other things that add either fat or they add mouthfeel to the products that aren't natural. So gums and lecithins. I mean, lecithin maybe isn't such a great example, but there's other surfactants that emulsify some of these ingredients.
What do you mean by mouthfeel?
So when you, let's see, where do I usually see gums? In plant-based milks. So people want the mouthfeel of like a whole milk. I mean, not everyone, because some people grew up drinking skim milk and they think that's whole milk is gross. But if you drink whole milk, it's got like this thicker mouthfeel. It doesn't taste like water. It doesn't feel like water in your mouth. Same with cream. Cream in your coffee isn't the same as adding water to your coffee. So when you get like an almond milk, if you make your own almond milk at home, it's actually really good. It's really easy, but it's pretty watery. And people want like this thick, like milk kind of consistency. So you have to add gums to it to create a mouth feel of this like thick and full product. So they're adding things that are not helpful to you to make the product feel the way that you want to consume more of it. All right, and then you were going to talk about the banned foods.
Did you bring that paper? What?
I asked you to bring it out.
It was in the printer.
Oh yeah,
Mimetic? Oh,
I
sure.
like that.
What? You didn't bring that?
No, that was not my part of the thing. So we have a list which we can grab.
Great.
I can actually grab it while
Never
she's
mind.
figuring out what to say. While we have a discussion, I'll pull it up because what I wanted to share with you all is the list of foods that are banned in other countries but still sold here, and a list of foods that California, I mean, some of you might know this, it comes across my desk every day. California just banned, I think, I'm not sure how many foods, between 3 to 5 foods in California are banned.
Like Skittles, like foods.
Are you talking foods or additives that are banned?
Both. So
Yeah.
there are specific foods that are actually banned. So like Skittles is an example. Skittles are banned in other countries, but still sold here. So like Skittles, for whatever reason, we'd have to look at our sheet. They have a specific ingredient in them that causes them to be banned in other countries. Is it? You think it's the dye? I'm not sure.
It's the dye.
That's not it, but that's in there. So
Maybe it's
titanium
the
dioxide.
beaver anus.
Titanium dioxide is a colorant. Like anything that's colored white around you, unless it's clothing or paper, it has titanium dioxide in it. So like, I don't know, pick a white thing around here. They use titanium dioxide. So we use it at work in powder coating to color things every single day. But it's really only an issue when it's in respirable form, not when it's bound up in a polymer or elsewhere. But it is used everywhere, just like PFAS. So PFAS, everyone's, oh, 3M's right down the road, right? So I've been dealing with 3M and PFAS for 30 years because I used to be the chairman of the Environmental Commission for Cottage Grove in Minnesota, and they were dumping 2 million gallons a day from the 3M facility in Cottage Grove into the Mississippi River with PFAS in it because there's no law against it. And so we had them clean that up and filter it before it goes to the Mississippi River, but 2 million gallons a day. And so that a day, it went into the Mississippi River. It went into because basically what's happening is, it's good for you guys to know because y'all live here. In Woodbury, in the 80s, they took 55-gallon drums or bigger things and buried them full of PFAS, Scotchgard, Scotch-Lite, all that kind of stuff. And they leaked over time. Well, it wasn't illegal for them to do that back in the day because there was no one knew back then that these things were dangerous. They leaked into the groundwater, into the well water, and into the city water that was pumped from that aquifer. So the city of Cottage Grove, Woodbury, Lake Elmo, whatever, they were pumping that water into the city water. No one filters it. Like you just add chlorine and fluoride, and then you maybe put a sediment filter on it, and that's it. So that was going into the water for decades. And people that have wells in Cottage Grove and Woodbury were purchased a reverse osmosis system by 3M to filter their water, but the cities weren't given that until recently. So they were trying to take the biggest plume of that PFAS and get it out of the groundwater so it didn't get into as many people's well water or in as high concentration to the city. So they pumped it from the Woodbury site to the Cottage Grove facility for 3M, ran it through their reactors to cool their processes down, and then dumped it into the Mississippi River. So then it went into someone else's drinking water down the line somewhere. So these are the things that happen every day. So some of the things in food, in these processed foods that are not natural, we don't know that they're harmful today, but we will tomorrow, potentially. Some of the things in our water, this is a big deal, like filtering your water at home. Like I've been filtering my water since I don't even remember when, a long time, because these PFAS compounds have been in there and they're at too high of levels in Woodbury and Minnesota to even meet federal guidelines. So they had to shut off our water in Cottage Grove selectively. They shut off different wells and they started adding filtration units over a year's period before they could turn those back on. So we couldn't like water or do anything like that to the lawn and the gardens for a year while they added all these filtration systems. But prior to the EPA saying those levels were too high, everybody had been drinking it for decades.
What were the effects? Like, what were people seeing? Like,
well,
how do they even know?
Well, PFAS builds up in the fat cells of the body. So over time, as they had to draw blood from Cottage Grove, 3M had to draw blood from Cottage Grove and Woodbury citizen residents for years to determine if the PFAS contaminants were increasing. And they had to give a physical every year for these people. For a long time, they had to go and get blood drawn. It was kind of crazy. So they were finding that the concentrations of PFAS increase in the blood over time. We're now seeing PFAS like at the North Pole. It's everywhere. I mean, PFAS, anything you can look around, I can show you where there's PFAS in it. My job at work is to remove PFAS from all of our products. So I'm like an expert on PFAS at the moment, and where you can find it. And I can tell you everywhere it is, and it is everywhere, like everywhere. So Minnesota banned.
What's the Generation X thing with
That's
PFAS?
a branded name of a PFAS compound. There are 12,000 PFAS compounds that have been created by man and woman um, in the lab. And 12,000, that's a lot. So you hear of Teflon, like that's a PFAS. And the Scotchgard was Teflon. 3M invented PTFE or PFOA molecules that they put into the things you spray in your car so you don't stain and have things stick to your car seats. So that was Scotchgard. That was a PFOA, perfluorooctyl, like substance, alkyl substance. Anyway, there's 12,000 of them. They're in just about everything that we manufacture in the US for lots of different reasons. Minnesota banned them in furniture starting next year, and in textiles, and in food contact, like your cups, like the Starbucks cups. They're still there today, but Minnesota says they won't be next year. That's impossible because they're used in every disposable cup ever. So to find a version free of that doesn't exist yet today. But yeah, Gen X is one you hear about a lot in the Cape Fear River of North Carolina. It was being dumped by maybe DuPont. So DuPont, what they did, I think it was DuPont or Dow, I can never get the two right. They're the biggest fluorochemical company in the world. They make all this fluorinated chemicals. And they're dumping this Gen X into the river and people were getting sick and there was all these lawsuits against them. So what they did is they consolidated their fluorochemistry business. They got rid of it from Dow and they called it Chemours. So the guy that invented or started DuPont, his name was, I think, DuPont de Chemours or something like that. So they created a company called Chemours. They took the fluorinated technology and they built it into there, spun it off from DuPont. So they're like, we don't do fluorinated chemistry anymore. Chemours, you're doing all the fluorinated chemistry. You guys deal with it. That's kind of what they just did 2 years ago. So they knew this was coming.
But what does it have to do with Gen X?
They're the ones that created Gen X, and they just basically they took all the lawsuits against Gen X, against DuPont, and said, it's now called Chemours. We have nothing to do with it. So they don't have to pay the lawsuits. Just like Johnson & Johnson declared bankruptcy. I don't know if everyone knows that. The baby powder fiasco. So they like baby powder, titanium dioxide, and other things like, oh, this could cause whatever it was. I don't know if it's leukemia or cancer. So they said, we have $4 billion of lawsuits against us, and we have $2 billion in the bank. We declare bankruptcy. We're not paying anybody. So that's what Johnson & Johnson just did to get away from these lawsuits. So a lot of these things are coming out. This ultra processed food, I think, is the next thing that we're going to start seeing lawsuits and people like you're going to really see it in the public. It's just not there yet. But there's lots of ways they avoid.
So is the media
things.
not doing their job, or why don't we know about this?
So that's where I always go is like with the light, like thousands of studies have been done about artificial light and how it impacts our biology. The mainstream media does nothing with it. Harvard put out an article. The American Medical Association has a warning letter. Go back to 2017 on the internet, put 2017 American Medical Association. There's a warning letter about LED lights and how they impact human health from even that group, and that was not publicized. So some of these ultra processed foods, like this article was published on CNN, and there was another in the BBC. So I think I'm starting to see a little bit, but where do these big television programs get their advertising funding from? You can't just go and attack the people that fund you. That's really hard to do, even if you know it's the right thing to do. So they're paying the bills. Pharmaceutical companies and food processing, they pay the bills of the media. So you can't do a whole lot there. So that's why, like what Mike does and what others do, like you go to the National Institute of Health to PubMed. Everyone can access it for free. You can't read all the studies for free, but you can read the abstracts and you can see what's being researched and what's being known in the scientific communities, even if it's not in the public yet. So that's kind of one of the main issues where you can't harm all of your revenue all at once.
Yeah, no.
It's part of the problem.
All right, we're just going to segue super quick. Couple notes that I took when I was doing some research on ultra processed foods, you guys. The long words on the ingredients list, like we've all seen them, right? And how many things have you ever picked up and you're like, I don't know what that means. It's like legalese. It's like, it's meant to be confusing, right? And we're not here to like go down some conspiracy rabbit hole or whatever, but these are just like common things that we see. And like I don't know, like don't know what they mean. So then we just go, oh, I'm not going to worry about it. Right. And that's kind of like the thinking of the past. And now, like, I would ask Thaddeus, I'd be like, Thaddeus, because he's a chemical engineer. He knows what the breakdown of all those things. I'm like, well, what is this thing? He's like, oh yeah, that's totally fine to have in small doses, or and these are what they're defined by the FDA. It's like it's fine in small doses, but why is that even good for my health and my spirit, right?
So
And
here's the
my
thing with the
cells.
small doses
Yeah.
that I want. So I spent 10 years in the pharmaceutical industry as a research scientist, and I had to quit because I couldn't keep doing that work anymore. So what I would do is I would develop a batch of children's medicine, so for kids. And we would put high fructose corn syrup in it and red dye number 40. Then we had to switch it to red dye number 41, then red dye 37 because they kept getting banned. So we were putting high fructose corn syrup, and we had to, like, this is back before computers like existed the way they do today. So we had to go to the books and we had to like look up the laxation point of high fructose corn syrup. That means the point at which you get diarrhea. And we're like, oh my God, how much are we adding to this little children's like cough and cold product? And we were at the laxation point with high fructose corn syrup in the cough and cold product. So then you can imagine, like, okay, it's fine in small amounts, right? But you're eating gummy bears and you're eating cereal and you're drinking a soda and then you're drinking your Robitussin or whatever I was making at the time, and you're way past the laxation point. Who knows where you are with the red dye number 40, and who knows where you are with these other chemicals, and who knows how they synergistically work. Like if you combine like dextromethorphan, a cough and cold medication, which they use to make meth nowadays, if you combine that, I think they use it like ketamine now too, which is super weird. Anyway, we used to put that in kids' products. And so that's why there's so many meth labs in Michigan, where this pharmaceutical company was based. Largest pharmaceutical company in the world in Michigan. No one's ever heard of it. I used to work there. So the synergy of like these compounds that you're from these processed foods, and as you mix them together, we don't even know what they do together. And that's called the synergy. When they mix together, like who knows what happens in the body. We're still learning all those things.
Yikes. That's scary. So, some of the things that I was researching too are like the excitotoxins. How many here have heard of excitotoxins? Like, you know what that means? So, quite a few of you. The dopamine hits, the sugar addiction, right? All of those things that come about from these um, compounds, I'll call them, and they create psychological effects. And in children, right? Like, these are things that they're in all these foods, but they're targeted for the children, and like that's where it kind of hits close to home for me. And my daughter, she would go in for some specialty like reading help in elementary school, and her reading teacher, would always reward her with sugar. And I'd be like, please stop doing that. I don't want you to look at sugar as a reward. And what is it creating? Like, you're trying to get her to focus, and it's the and to this day, Thaddeus has kids in elementary school last year. They still reward kids with sugar in school. It's like, don't we know better? Like, don't they know better? And so, like, I would say, can you give her a sticker instead? And she did. Like, but she was the only one that, I was like, please do not do that. So, kind of like standing up. I feel like this is standing up for our future generations too, and our children. And another thing, you guys, so the natural flavors, this I thought was really interesting. Natural flavors, they can be 80,000 different chemical compounds. Think of that. Think of how many times you've seen the word natural flavors on something which has a healthy or all natural or organic or whatever label on it. And did you know that that can be from the FDA, it says if it comes from a natural source, that's a plant or an animal. So anything that is vegan or vegetarian can have natural flavors in it that came from meat. So a lot of times people are even thinking that they are eating vegan or vegetarian because of, like whatever reason that you would do that.
Why would anyone do that?
No, but why? I mean, they wouldn't have any idea it's from a cow, and it can be from any part of the animal. It doesn't, we don't know, and they can get away with that. So it's like, oh my God, why don't we, like, know more about this? So I implore every one of you, and like these are things, like, I just went and did a little bit more research. I found 3 articles. 2 of the articles were from a mainstream source, and they came back with, like, Yeah, these natural compounds are, you know, they can be with at the small doses, they can be harmful to the body, but it's such a small dose. Like, don't worry about it. So, what Thaddeus just said too, like, how many things are you eating a day that have natural flavors in them that are compounding this, Hannah?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, with all the natural flavors, how do you determine, like, for example, I like those electrolytes.
Yeah.
I'm sure they have natural flavors in them. How do you vet that or gauge maybe when they're better or sourced better than other ones?
Well, I mean, we,
Natural flavors.
yeah.
Yeah. Maybe, do you know, Mike? Like, how would you vet that? Would you call? I mean, you call Rob or somebody, but
Yeah, you have to call someone there because even a lot of times they won't know. Most companies hire what's called a flavor house, and the flavor house, what they've done, especially the last 5 years, is they make it a proprietary thing because they want your business so that you can't take their formula and go somewhere
Right.
else. They also know that people like the same taste of products. So I know some people in the industry wanted to switch, and the cost they just said was too much. So the flavor house increased their price by 40% or whatever, something crazy. And they just said, well, fine, we'll just pay it because the cost of changing that flavor for everything that was already out there. A lot of times that's a proprietary thing. Sometimes they'll tell you, sometimes they won't. Most of the time they unfortunately won't. So it's even harder, like even when you know the people to ask.
they don't know.
Even then, like I've talked to some of the flavor houses for formulation, and they'll just tell you flat out, like you can sign an NDA, you can do whatever you want, but we own all the rights to that, and that's how they keep their business going.
Right.
So if you weren't aware of how that works, like if I work for Procter and Gamble, they make a lot of products, and let's say they're going to make Tang. So I think they maybe sold that to someone else by now, but Tang, a lot of us remember. We would have created a formula for Tang, but it tastes like crap, right? It's just like a bunch of chemicals they mix together. So they would send that formula to a flavor house, and there's a bunch of them in Cincinnati because of P&G in Northern Kentucky. The flavor house then takes that formula and starts basically creating in the lab all these different flavor profiles and formulas and putting it into Procter and Gamble's Tang. And then they find like the top 3 or 4 Tang flavors they like the best. They send them to P&G. P&G tries them. And they're like, we like this one. They don't know what's in it. They just know a flavor profile had been created. And that flavor agent then, it's a mixture of a bunch of chemicals, would just be called natural flavors, sold to P&G in a big vat. They inject it in at the end of the processing line, and it goes in your product. And neither P&G, who makes the product, nor you actually knows what's in there. So like Mike said, some of those companies will tell you what the natural flavors are, and they have the full list, and they don't mind telling you. But others, it is proprietary, and you'll never find out, what it is necessarily.
Another, oh, go ahead.
Oh, question. So I've heard that they use like human DNA too, like lab grown.
So here's when I researched that. I've heard that too, and I'm like, is that true? So what I found when I researched it is they took aborted fetal cells from 1971 and they grew those in a lab to proliferate them, and they're used in Pepsi and Coke, I think, a few flavoring agents from these flavoring houses, but they don't use those cells directly. They take those cells, those human cells, and my understanding, maybe Mike knows more, they use those cells to create in the lab a flavoring agent from the DNA, creating a protein structure from those cells. That's my understanding of how they use those cells to create the flavoring that goes into the food. I don't know if you know any more about that whole.
Yeah, I don't. And the hard part with all that stuff is I work with some people who was one of the top CEOs at Coke or Pepsi, and he doesn't even know all of the stuff that went on. I mean, and he was like one of the top people there. So it's so hard to verify like yay or nay.
Yeah.
And for good reason, because that's their proprietary
Right.
thing, right? That's their quote unquote technology.
Yep. So I think I've definitely heard that. I think if you research it to where you can get good data and not conspiracy data, like I always start the conspiracy side. I'm like, what's true? And it's definitely true that they're using, it's like they have a name, like the woman's name is on that cell line, and a lot of the flavor houses own that cell line of aborted fetal cells, and they do make flavoring compounds from those cells, but I'm not exactly sure like how they're making that compound and what that compound is. That I couldn't find. But is it happening? Definitely. That's not a secret, but what they're making from it appears to be, because I couldn't track that down. So that is in flavoring agents, and I think they list which flavors. It would be something like Coke for sure, and there was 2 more. I'm just not remembering. Mountain Dew is not one of those that used it, but it's one of those things that's banned. That was one of the banned foods in other countries. There's 2 reasons for it. One is the high caffeine content. I think some of you might have seen the article where somebody died in the last couple months from Panera, from a
Teenage girl.
from a lemonade
Yeah.
that was spiked with caffeine. It was like charged lemonade or something.
How many milligrams did it have? It was like
300 milligrams of caffeine. Like a cup of
crazy.
coffee is 95 to 125 milligrams. This was 300 milligrams, but
I think it was 400.
maybe.
I think it was more than 300.
Mountain Dew also contains BVO, which is a banned ingredient. It's one of those ingredients that will be banned in California, but not for 3 years. So for 3 more years, you can keep using it. It's brominated vegetable oil. So we use brominated oils in, we don't anymore, but we used to in the furniture industry for flame retardants. We're using them in Mountain Dew, and what it does in Mountain Dew is it's a citrus flavor. Anything with a citrus flavor, they don't mix well with water. So you put a citrus flavor in Sprite or Mountain Dew, and the flavor agent, the flavor like liquid, rises to the top, and it just sits there as like a pool of oil. Nobody wants that in their Mountain Dew. So they add brominated vegetable oil, and it allows that to emulsify and stay in mixture or solution and not rise to the top. So that's one of those ingredients in Mountain Dew that's banned in other places, including California in 3 years from now, but it's still available on the market to everybody today. But it's bad enough that they banned it. We banned it in the furniture industry 10 years ago, still used in Mountain Dew, you can drink it. And so people ask me all the time in the furniture industry, so let me get this straight. I can't sell a chair with PFAS in it, but the drinking water in the city has 10 times the amount of PFAS that would be in the chair, and that's legal. So I get pushed back all the time with my suppliers. I'm like, I can't buy this from you because it has PFAS. And they're like, our water that we drink has more PFAS than this. How come I can't sell you a chair with it in it? That's the law. You can drink it, but you can't be in your chair.
Well, and you know, one side note to you guys, like this is it's depressive information, right? It's like, why is that? It seems unfair and
It's
injustice.
the best news ever because we have a solution.
But it's like stressing out about it is worst, right? Thaddeus gives talks on EMF all the time, and people are always like, oh my God. I'm like, oh my God, it's worse to stress out about it. So it's like being proactive and keeping your spirit high and your frequency trumps all of that. I just heard Dr. Joe Dispenza, do you guys know him? I heard him talk. He's like, you can be eating the most ketogenic, carnivore, vegan, paleo, gluten-free, you know, like, oh, he's being funny, diet. And if you are walking around in fear and in being worried all the time, none of that stuff is even going to assimilate in your body, and you're not even going to absorb the nutrients from it, right? So, and things like, yeah, of course. I mean, it's your mindset too. And so like staying on top of that, and I'm a mindset coach. So this is what I talk about all the time, but it's like, we don't let that stuff get us down either. We're aware of it and we educate people about it. And then we do something about it. And first and foremost, like for our own volition, right? Like for ourselves, and staying in a high frequency and really going, okay, what ingredients do I want in my foods? Instead of looking at what you don't want, what do you want? And so one of the things Thaddeus and I were talking about when we were putting this together is like, how about just one ingredient? I had a friend who was in my Facebook group and she was like, well, what do I want to look for ingredients? I'm like, one.
Lettuce.
Just one, like whatever the food is, like that should be the food, right? Like it's just kind of common sense. And we all know, like I grew up, my mom had this incredible garden and she's always grown in like tomatoes and carrots, and you can taste that, right? And you can taste the difference. We all know that, what that tastes like. So going back to, you know, growing our own food and being independent, and Thaddeus has planted a bunch of fruit trees in our yard, and just like, you know, really being stewards of our land. And we don't put any chemicals on our ground either. So we're foragers and we eat our lawn and we eat the dandelions in the spring. And so there's always this upswing to like, yes, this is all dark and nefarious, but look at over here.
Well, I think
right?
what we look at is like, when we're here in this earth, school, existence, whatever we're in, like we have this body that's like an avatar, right? So like in a video game, you get this avatar, and your avatar could be a car. And what are you going to put in that car? Like if it's a gasoline car, you're not going to put diesel in it because it's going to destroy the engine. You're going to keep the oil change. You're going to do all the things to keep the car running at tip-top shape. But people don't look at their own bodies in the same way. Like we get this avatar to inhabit while we're here on this plane. And while we're here, like we can choose what to make up our body from, because every single cell, all the blood cells, every skin cell in our body came from the food that we eat and the water we drink. Like every cell in your body turns over. Within 7 years, even your bones are brand new cells. So what does that mean? Like, are you going to worry about the cancer and the heart disease and all these things you can get? And my question is always like, if we have these bodies that remove the existing heart, like this heart in 7 years is not the same heart. It's made up of completely new cells 7 years from now. And that's bone. So it's probably like 3 years from now for the heart. How can it be that with a brand new cell, you could still have heart disease that you had 3 years ago, or cancer, or whatever it is? Like, shouldn't we be able to program and feed these bodies to renew those cells with the things that we want to make ourselves up from? So I think that we need to know like what's out there that we should avoid. Not that you always avoid it forever, but you don't make that the largest part of your diet. And then start to decide, like you make the decision of what you want to make yourselves up from. Like, who do you want to be moving around for the rest of your life? And you have an opportunity to not be the same person 7 years from now that you are today, if that's something that you want. Like I 100% believe that in the last 15 years, I have completely changed everything about myself. Like from the ability to speak in public, which I couldn't do before, it limited my job opportunities, to like how I think about things, to even the makeup of my body. My cells are brand new. And you can see people like reverse scars and scar tissue and do all these things because you have this informed field all around you that tells your cells how to become a new cell. And you can change that informed field to have the cells be different than they are today. So I think like your mind is so much more powerful than you're told, and getting depressed and like fearful about these things is not what we want. We want to know what's out there and know what to avoid, and then know how to make up our avatar, our body from the right things. And then we can program the field around us to be how we want to be in the world.
So are you telling me in 7 years I could be young again?
So here's the thing I've always
State of
wondered.
mind.
I don't see why
Yes.
not. And I'm not saying like I've ever seen anybody do it, but like what's our body made up of? Cells. And the cells get renewed all the time. Some of them every day. And what are the cells made up of? Atoms, eventually molecules, and then atoms. And like, do atoms age ever? So if atoms never age, and they've been around here, if you believe like the scientific history, billions of years, they've never aged. They don't change. So like, why do we age? We have this programmed mindset that that's what we do. But the atoms inside of our cells have never changed. They've never aged, and they never do. They never will.
We're gonna get existential here.
So I've always been like, what?
There's
How?
actually that example of that guy, right? That really wealthy guy.
Oh,
that's
the
doing that experiment.
Brian
where he's
Johnson?
Doing all the compounds and the exercise and the whole 9 yards. And they actually measure like your body systems, and they'll be like, well, it started at like a 50-year-old and now it's down to a 35-year-old or whatever. And so there's getting to be some pretty good evidence of things along this line with people actually measuring everything. And this guy's like a human guinea pig because he has to live for this. I mean, every second. But it seems like there's actual evidence now.
He also takes his son's, who's 18, his blood every day and puts it into his own body.
Oh, I
He's-
didn't know that.
Like he's psychotic.
He's a little
He's a little extreme.
He's a little
in-
extreme.
Yeah. But his goal is to live to 180. His name's Brian Johnson, but
Okay.
he
You won't know.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, is he speeding up his
Yeah.
his goal is to never die.
Which is crazy. Like,
But his goal is to never die. But he's got a lot of spiritual work to do then.
He has a-
He's got a lot of spiritual what?
Work to do. Yeah.
Could
His light,
have a heart
his light
attack at
body.
any moment.
Yeah.
It's a lot of stress.
I think
Right.
like what we're learning is like we have these programmed mindsets of how we age and how we are and what we do. And what we're learning is we can change those things. Like we can change the reality itself seemingly because we just don't understand all the rules yet. And we're still learning the rules. And are the rules like it's only biochemical? So it's only the biochemistry in the body, like maybe Brian Johnson is looking at. It's like food, like he's a vegan. He only eats once a day and he has his chef prepared meals and whatever. And he's doing calorie restriction to extend his lifespan based on the research. But at least, I don't know what Mike's seen, the research I've seen for calorie restriction and lifespan increase is not on mammals. It's on mostly like worms and other things. So when you start to restrict calories in men and women, I don't know that I've seen a ton of good research showing that that extends your life. And he's like in a calorie deficit a lot. And then he's got to take, what, 120 supplements to make up for his calorie deficit that he's not eating.
Every day.
Thyroid stress.
Yeah.
He's on a bunch of pharmaceutical compounds too, like prescribed drugs because of his diet that he's trying to do to live forever. Now he's got to go to the doctor to
I mean,
get
why don't you
thyroid
just sign up to be a
medication.
vampire.
He looks like a vampire. So.
It's crazy.
There was 2 main studies that were done in monkeys. It's like the best data we have. Like earthworms, it's like a 46.
It's a lot, yeah.
57%, but as you scale up to mice and to smaller mammals, it seems to dissipate. And unfortunately, in one of the studies, they found out later, if you look back, they retroactively pulled back some of it because they were doing a caloric restriction of these monkeys. They had spent several $1 million. What they found out later was that study probably isn't valid because one of the workers who was taking care of the monkeys felt bad for them, so actually started feeding the monkeys. And then
Oh my God.
later, if you look at that literature, you want to make sure you look all the way through. Later, they found out probably cost them $10 to $20 million or something like that because it was a long-term study. It was an over-a-year study. So unfortunately, we don't even have as good a data from those 2 studies as what we would like. But it seems to be
hilarious.
definitely becomes less and less and less as you scale up.
Want to introduce Mike? People know like what?
Yeah, I know Mike, you and Jody came late, but Dr. Mike T. Nelson, so extremely knowledgeable researcher. These two travel all around the world giving lectures and presentations. Mike's adjunct faculty at some universities as well. He has his own specialty program on metabolic flexibility. So Mike's a good friend of ours and we travel in some of the same circles, but Mike is everywhere and he's like respected by so many people. Like I call Mike one of my most famous friends. So.
And we met you guys.
So many people.
Yeah. And we met in Austin. We didn't even meet here.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
Jody and I were talking.
That's
She's
right,
like, well,
yeah.
we live in White Bear Lake. I'm like,
What?
what? Why don't we know you? So, well, I think we brought a couple books. I'm just going to turn the discussion really quick, you guys.
For books because they're fun.
We have, I'm going to let Thaddeus discuss this one and then we'll do more questions. But The Yoga of Nutrition. If you guys haven't read this book, Peng, have you heard of this? This is Omram,
Christian mystic.
Christian
He's
mystic,
really
Omram
impressive.
Ibanohav.
From
He
the
was Wayne Dyer's teacher.
1910,
And
1920.
this is really good. So this is him. He's super crazy dude.
There's two. So just so you know, there's 2 books. One by Charles Eisenstein called The Yoga of Eating,
Oh yeah.
which I read back in 2004, and another, and that one is phenomenal about how to think about eating. And it's a short book. It's really good. And then I was looking up The Yoga of Eating, but I spelled it wrong and I put Yoga of Nutrition, and I came on this book. So this guy's a Christian mystic monk from Bulgaria, and he only taught verbally in Europe, so Bulgaria and France only, in the 1920s, 1930s, and someone started recording written transcripts of his lectures, and that's what, he has like 30 books. He's dead now, but
Pass it around.
30 books were transcribed by these people that wrote down. And as a Christian mystic, he talks about how to think about eating and nutrition.
He's big on vegetarianism too.
And he also talks about like the life force. Like, are you consuming food that is adding life to your body? Or are you consuming food that takes life from your body to process it? And that is where like these dead ultra processed foods take our life force to make them into something we can use, where whole foods, we receive the life force from the food and build ourselves up. And now those are concepts I learned from that book. And he's also the Christian mystic that, if you know me, he gets outside every single day at sunrise and sees the sun. no matter what. He's never missed a day, and he takes the whole like monastery out with him and sees the sunrise and why it's so special.
But they eat the sun rays too. So like getting even more kind of esoteric, he's imagining the sun rays like coming into his body as nutrition, which is another level of like, oh, that's interesting. There's a lot.
That's not far fetched, right?
Right.
I mean, you guys know it.
Vitamin
Vitamin D. It's like,
Yeah.
oh,
You-
yeah,
Totally.
are.
You can create physical things within your body from light. Like who knew? But light, I mean, everything is energy, right? So why couldn't you? So you're taking that light with sulfonated cholesterol in the skin and forming not vitamin D. I always like to call it hormone D because it's a hormone for the body. And like people think of it as a vitamin you can eat, but if you think of it as a hormone, then it gives you a little bit better picture of like what it's doing in your body. But yeah, like you're generating, you're releasing nitric oxide from the mitochondrial chain, which is heart health, like nitric oxide, like opens up the blood vessels and reduces blood pressure. And then you're creating vitamin D and all these things from the sun. And those are just the ones we know about. Like who knows what else it can do for us.
And then
So that's a good book, as well as the Yoga of Eating.
we also have the Nourishing Traditions. How many of you know this? Yeah.
So
Maggie,
Weston A.
sorry,
Price
Weston A. Price
Foundation.
Foundation. So my uncle, my great uncle, his name is Dr. Joe Phillips. He studied Weston A. Price, and my uncle is like an OG biohacker. He's not in this. He's not in his body anymore, but he might have even known him, Weston A. Price, which is pretty cool. He used to give lectures. He was a dentist, and he wrote a book called, you read it, I didn't read it, Dead Dentists Don't Lie? No,
Adam Bergstrom wrote Dead Dentists.
no, Adam wrote that book, but my uncle,
He wrote a book called like blotting. He invented the blotting brush.
he was an orthodontist. Okay.
Okay. He invented a blotting brush. It was super famous, sold millions of them. And he wrote a book about the blotting brush, but I can't remember the
Okay.
name of
Okay.
the book.
But in Dead Dentist, you guys heard of Dead Doctors Don't Lie? Heard that? Okay, well, there's another book called Dead Dentists Don't Lie. So he's in the dental field. And that's what Weston A. Price's foundation is from, studying indigenous tribes all over the world. You can probably explain this better because I actually haven't read
He
this
went
book.
around the world and studied indigenous tribes and what they ate and how they looked, their face
face
structure, jaw
structures.
structure, and who was the healthiest. And he found people not eating a Western diet were the healthiest, but what did they actually do? And this whole book explains like what he found is they were soaking, sprouting, and fermenting their grains, which rendered them more digestible because they have anti-nutrients. You think of a seed and a grain, and it doesn't want to just like sprout in the winter because it's going to die. So it doesn't want to give away its nutrition to the seed sprout that's going to become a new plant until the right time. So it binds the nutrients with anti-nutrients so they're not available. Just like if an animal eats the seed, it wants it to poop it out with fertilizer. And then when the seed sprouts, it releases the enzymes to create the nutrients for that plant. So what Weston A. Price found is soaking, sprouting, and fermenting these grains make them far more digestible for most people. And they don't have the anti-nutrients. People have less issues with them. So he advocated, based on studying all the tribes, soaking, sprouting, and fermenting grains, and then eating some amount of animal products. So every tribe ate animal products. Not that that was the main part of their diet, but they somehow ate an animal product to get specific nutrition that they couldn't get elsewhere in nature.
And I like to think about that too as like the life force, you know, like when you make sprouts, the life force like comes out of the seed, right? Like that's what they are saying to put into your body. And so this is written by Sally Fallon, and there's a Weston A. Price chapter in St. Paul,
St. Paul, Minneapolis, Twin Cities.
Yep. So, and they're free to attend anytime. And people that come here, are like all of us in this room, like we're just interested in learning more. And it's a really fun time to connect with other people that are in local farmers. That's
It's mostly made up of local
farmers.
farmers,
Yeah.
local organic farmers.
So if you want to know some local cool people, that's a fun one. And there's also booze there, and there's a fisherman there that goes. He actually schooled his children. He took them up to Alaska every
He's from Minnesota. He lives in Minnesota,
like
but he
every
goes up to fishing
couple times
season.
fishing season, whenever it
Whatever,
is,
I don't remember
until I
what
don't
it is,
fish, but he would school his children by taking them fishing in Alaska. He's like, this is how I teach my children. I'm like, holy
And then he
crap,
comes and he
that's
sells
super
at all the
cool.
farmers markets here in the Twin Cities,
Yeah.
the fish he catches in Alaska.
And
all
he's got the
wild caught.
craziest posters. He's like, here's, school day one, here's my kid, and the kid's like pulling in. It's kind of cute. And then this is a recent friend of ours. We just met her a year ago, Tanya Teschke. And she wrote this crazy ass book. There's no more of these. She's got to reprint them. But we met Tanya at our Florida mastermind that Thaddeus and I host every year. And she lived in Bordeaux and she went around for 3 years cooking with all the French culinary gastronomy in local farmers, like the markets. She just visited everybody, grandmothers, and learned how they cooked. And this is really big in organ meats. And she's going to write another book all about organ meats, or else revise this one. But she talks a lot about the fad diet, which is kind of funny, but it's the French ancestral diet. So she uses a lot of lard and duck fat, tallow. She has her own line of beauty products. I talked to you about that, that use tallow as their base, their animal based. And Thaddeus and I are actually podcasting with her to get her take on that, which I think is really interesting because we live in this crazy inverted plane where everybody thinks like because it's plant based and that's what they're really pushing right now, that that's the best thing. And she talks about the complete opposite of that in a different, I don't know, just a really different way. But cooking nose to tail and mostly meat, I think, in this book.
And I think you need both.
Yeah.
But it's like they set up this we're in a polarized world. So like I don't call it a duality because it's not like light, dark, white, black. It's like it's one plane and there's just two sides and they're both part of the same thing. And the same thing is like vegetarian or vegan and carnivore. Like they both want the same thing in the end. We both sides of that equation want to be optimally healthy, eat less processed foods, and cut out all the junk and put things in the body that give us life force. So like they have set up these camps to oppose each other, but in actuality, they both want exactly the same thing. And if you could just talk to each other, at some point you see on social media, they usually don't, but everyone kind of wants the same things, but the polarization is set up in a way that makes that challenging.
And I think too, like the biggest message of, like the ultra processed foods and diets, and it's like there's so much scramble in the messaging, right? There's so much marketing, there's so much confusion, and it's like this is what Thaddeus and I teach is like everybody's unique. Everybody has their own physiology. So whatever works for Hannah isn't going to work for me, right? And so experimenting on yourself and finding out like what gives me. Taylor is a great experimenter in different diets and like how does it feel? Try it on for size for a few weeks and see what works for you and see if you like get phlegm in your throat, if your heartbeat elevates. There's different signs that we're not taught in our bodies to look for. And I just learned recently this year, like if I eat a food and my heart starts beating fast, like there's some kind of reaction that's probably not a good one, right? And so to really be paying attention to some of those foods that, you know, Thaddeus could be allergic to and I could eat any day. So it totally depends on your own physiology and having, I don't know, not courage, but just like the wherewithal of being like, oh, like this could be the thing for me, right? And maybe not for somebody else. So I guess curiosity is what I'm trying to say.
I think that's key is like
Yeah.
self-experimentation. Because like while our biology is all the same, like we all have the same biology, we have different traumas, we have different stresses, we have a different set of exercise, and we're different ages. So following what someone says is the best diet for them doesn't mean it's the best diet for you because we're all at different places. So while the biology is the same and someone might say, this is the best, here's the justification from the literature, honestly, like we're all at different places in our lives and it might not work based on just, again, your stress level, your scar tissue in your body, wherever it is, like other things that are going